Well, if you watched the very first episode that we did for the History Traveler series, you might have saw that we were at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. Well, we are back. The very same location. There's a couple of reasons why I wanted to come here. For one, there's an organization called Wreaths across America that comes out every year and decorates different parts of the cemetery. So I thought that'd be kind of cool to come and see. And also in that first video, to be honest, there were some pretty interesting locations and graves and historic markers that I left out that I wanted to come back and hit just because they're so fascinating. So we're gonna wander around here in the snow. I don't think it's supposed to get above 30 degrees today, but we're gonna walk around and see what we can find. So if you go back and watch episode 20 in the History Traveler series, you can see I went to the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., which is an absolutely amazing and moving place. Well, what I didn't include is some of the history behind it. So originally it was set up to hold the remains of an unknown soldier from World War I. Then in 1958, I'm pretty sure, they added the remains of soldiers from World War II and Korea. And then in 1984, if I'm not mistaken, they added the remains of a serviceman from Vietnam. Well, if you go there today, the tomb that holds the remains of the Vietnam serviceman is empty because he's right here at Jefferson Barracks. So this is the grave of Michael Joseph Blasi. And I'm gonna just move this wreath back. No disrespect, but just to be able to kind of see back there. You can see he died in May of 1972. He was a pilot that got shot down outside of An Loc in Vietnam. And he was laid to rest at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And then in 1998, they did DNA testing, identified who it was, and he was no longer unknown. So now, he rests here at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery. Pretty interesting. Purple Heart, air medal with 4 oak leaf clusters. And then you can see there it says, Unknown Soldier, May 28th, 1984 to May 14th, 1998. Very interesting. Now, if you are a fan of baseball in general, and Cardinals baseball in particular, you might recognize this grave. It's got a wreath on it, and some snow. So we're just gonna dust some of this off and temporarily pull this back. John Buck, who baseball fans might better know as Jack Buck. Legendary announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was in World War II and was wounded at Remagen, where the famous bridge at Remagen was. Pretty interesting. Caught some shrapnel in the arm and leg, if I remember correctly. But old Jack Buck is here. Well, this just shows what a smart guy I am. There's a mass grave that I know is here from World War II, and the story behind it is really quite tragic. The problem is all of these mass graves have flat markers, and stupid me, I didn't take into account the fact that there's going to be about 5 inches of snow covering all of them. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of excavation work through this snow, see if I can find what I'm looking for. But if I do, the story it's tragic, but it's interesting. It's something that I don't think a lot of people know about. Okay, well, fortunately for me, there are some depressions in the snow. You can see where some deer have been walking through here. But there's some depressions in the snow that kind of show me where these larger markers are at. So I'm going to clear some of these off, see what I can find. Okay, here's a depression that somebody left a wreath at. So I'm really hoping that this is what I'm looking for. Okay, well, I uncovered a corner of the marker, and that is the grave I was looking for. So I went back to my truck, got a snow brush. We're going to clean it up a little bit so we can see better. While I'm heading back over here, though, I'll tell at least the beginning of the story. Whenever the Japanese were moving in to the Philippines in 1942, a lot of U.S. troops ended up getting captured and were held as prisoners of war by the Japanese, Bataan and Corregidor. Now, there was one group that was held at a place in the Philippines called Palawan, I think is how you pronounce it. And whenever the U.S. forces started moving back in December of 1944, well, the Japanese sounded an air raid siren. All the prisoners went to their barracks where they were supposed to whenever an air raid siren went off. The Japanese doused the whole thing with barrels of gasoline and burned them all to death. There were a few that escaped, but not many. And 123 of them are buried right here. All right, well, got it kind of cleaned up there. And golly, just seeing all those names. Something else. Terrible that these guys went through all of that, being a prisoner of the Japanese, being worked, starved, and then just whenever they were probably within days of rescue, have this atrocity happen to them. I don't know why they're buried here at Jefferson Barracks. So I don't know, maybe somebody can find the information on that and let me know. But wow, don't know what to say other than that the price of freedom is high. Here's the grave of a Medal of Honor recipient named George Hobday. And if you can see there, it says he was in the U.S. 7th Cavalry. I'm going to brush away some of this snow here. And you can see it says Indian Wars down there. Well, it turns out George Hobday got his Medal of Honor at a place called Wounded Knee in 1890, where several hundred Lakota Native Americans were killed while they were trying to be disarmed. We now regard that as a massacre. But this guy was a cook, and somebody thought that his actions that day warranted the Medal of Honor. So in recent times, there's kind of this trend going on where, I don't know, people are getting really angry at different historic figures and I guess, I don't know, acting on that anger in some pretty destructive ways. I prefer to take pieces of history like this and just learn from it. Now, by today's standards, does George Hobday deserve the Medal of Honor? Probably not. But the fact that he got it, well, that's historically important information. That teaches us a lot about the attitudes at the time. So, we can't do anything about it. We can't change history. But we can learn from it. Now, I just accidentally stumbled on this one. Here's a guy named David Ryan, who also got the Medal of Honor, and also in the Indian Wars. But I don't know anything about David Ryan, so I'll have to do a little research on that guy. Okay, so I'm back at a spot that I visited during that very first video at Jefferson Barracks, where we saw some graves of some Italian and German POWs from World War II that were buried here at Jefferson Barracks among the American servicemen and women. And we talked a little bit about how, by today's standards, that might be seen as a little bit controversial having them buried here. So I'm getting ready to go to a different section of the cemetery where we're going to find some more remains of POWs from a different war that, by today's standards again, might also be seen as a little bit controversial. Hey, looky there. Getting ready to turn on Lieutenant Blasi Drive. We wouldn't have known who that was before, but now we do. Well, crud. Looks like old JD might be doing a little bit of walking on this trip. Well, you may or may not notice that I'm in a little bit different part of the cemetery. If you look, all of these grave markers have a point to them instead of being rounded. That's because I'm in the Confederate section of the cemetery, and all of the Confederate markers have a point. So here at Jefferson Barracks, we've seen German and Italian prisoners of war buried here from World War II. We've seen a guy who won the Medal of Honor for his actions at Wounded Knee, where hundreds of Native Americans were massacred. And then there's also this section with the Confederates who rebelled against the United States and tried to form a country of their own, had a system that was built on the backs of slaves. So you might ask, why are these people who should be considered enemy combatants buried here amongst the Union dead and dead from World War II American soldiers? Well, in 1868, the Grand Army of the Republic decided that they would decorate the graves of the Confederate soldiers and have them buried alongside the Union soldiers as an act of reconciliation, which I think is pretty honorable. A lot of people want to, deface some of these graves and things like that. The people at the time were moving towards unity, though. And I think that's pretty admirable considering what the country had just been through. So in this Christmas season, I think that's something important to remember, this idea of reconciliation, because that's what Christmas is all about. There's not a single person buried in this whole cemetery, or anybody who's ever lived who isn't deeply flawed in some way. And yet God sends His Son so that we might be reconciled to Him. Imperfect people, deeply flawed, in need of a Savior. And at Christmas, we remember that reconciliation that happens through His Son. So, pretty amazing place. Saw a lot of Christmas wreaths as I was going through here in different parts of the cemetery. So I think I'm gonna stop talking and just spend what time I have left looking around here at the cemetery. Amazing place.